Does that beautiful melody sound familiar? It should. It's the principal theme of the first movement of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor, which is at the very top of the top 40 violin concertos in the repertoire. That was Frank Almond playing it, and Frank is the concertmaster of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. He'll be its featured soloist in that very concerto at the MSO opener on September the 14th.
Mendelssohn, just as an artist and as a composer, fell at a kind of funny time historically. You know, he wasn't really Schubert, but he wasn't really Brahms, you know? So to me, the differences between those two eras are always more of the question than anything else. In other words, you see people approach this piece in a much more classical, transparent, sort of clear-eyed way, or more in the Schubert world. And then you see people treat this more like a late romantic, you know, kind of over-the-top language instead. A typical example of what I'm talking about really is even the opening theme, where some people play it, you know, very overheated and kind of driving. A little bit faster, maybe I'm overdoing it.
Pushing it ahead.
It's really fast vibrato. And then there's another school that has a little more kind of, you know, clear-eyed, simpler approach. Where it's maybe more in the Schubert direction.
Right. It could almost be lyrical like a song, or it could be driving almost like a quick march. And I think both ways of approaching it can really work.
And like a lot of composers, artists tend to, this all comes from both an artist's concept of it, but also what he wrote in the part. And his markings, Mendelssohn's markings are pretty precise, but they're open to interpretation. You know, he writes molto appassionato at the beginning. So what does that mean?
Right. There are a lot of ways to be very passionate, right? What's your own history with this piece? When did you start playing it?
I don't exactly remember, but I do remember, like most violinists, it was early on. I probably played it as a teenager a few times, not much with orchestra, a few times in my 20s with orchestra. So there was an evolution to it, but I haven't actually played it in quite a while, so it's really nice to go back and see what I missed.
Well, what did you miss? Is there anything you can really put your hands on and say, I know something new about this piece now?
Well, some of what I referred to earlier is a kind of generational thing. You know, in the 60s and 70s, and I think really even on into the 80s, with the violinists who were prominent at the time and the interpretations that were conventional, you know, you had a little bit more of a romantic tint to it, I think. You know, that kind of a little bit sloppy,
hard on
but yeah, right. Now it's more common. You know, you might hear. It's a little more song-like. It's a little more in the direction of Schubert, songs without words. You know, that filter. So as the scholarship has changed, and as I'm a little bit older than the last time I played it. So you rethink things, and you know, it was funny going back and just looking at the music. There are new editions out now where you can look at, compare the two versions of this piece that Mendelssohn wrote, and you know, there are a lot of things that inform it, and hopefully you give still a nuanced, mature performance that's different from the time you were 22, or that's what I'm trying for.
This particular violin, the Lipinski Stradivarius violin, beautiful thing, beautiful sound, has a history with this particular concerto.
Well, yeah, it does actually. Lipinski has quite a history with, not quite a history, but a certain amount of history with Mendelssohn and Ferdinand David, the violinist for whom Mendelssohn wrote this concerto. Real quickly, Ferdinand David was Mendelssohn's concertmaster for the Gewandhaus Orchestra where Mendelssohn conducted, and Mendelssohn wrote this concerto for Mr. David. When that position of concertmaster was open in the orchestra in 1835, there was an audition, and Lipinski went to Leipzig to audition. and was not very happy when Mendelssohn's childhood friend and colleague got the job and he didn't. So Lipinski went and auditioned on this violin with Mendelssohn sitting there, and I'm sure Mendelssohn had a healthy respect for his playing, but he went with his buddy from school, and Lipinski never was particularly happy about that and didn't have a lot of great things to say either about Mendelssohn or Mr. David or this concerto, really.
Now, this piece has a particular place in music history. We talked about sort of on the fulcrum of classical and romantic thinking in music, but just there are certain technical innovations in this piece. For example, there are musical transitions from one movement to the next that are all tied together. You don't stop. And I understand that Mendelssohn did that because he wanted to suppress the traditional applause between movements, because he wanted the whole thing to move in that way. But also the cadenza has some innovation about it. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's right in the middle of the first movement, which was very unusual at the time. Generally, you'd get to sort of the end of the first movement, and then there would be this cadenza, chance for the violinist or the soloist to play as, by themselves. And then the orchestra would come back in and finish the piece. This one, everything drops out, and the cadenza acts not only as a sort of virtuoso vehicle for the soloist, but also leads the orchestra back into what eventually becomes a recapitulation and a restatement of the material and a coda. So there's a substantial amount of music after the cadenza in this piece, which is something that a lot of other composers picked up on later on. Tchaikovsky, Sibelius, who put the cadenza 1 minute into the first movement. So.
But also, I think related to that is Mendelssohn wrote out, he composed the cadenza, which was unusual. I think this has to do with making the cadenza integral to the music. In many of these older concerti, it's like you're stepping outside for a breath of the composer's, of the performer's own ideas. Could we hear a little bit of Mendelssohn's?
Sure.
Mendelssohn's cadenza.
It starts out with a lot of arpeggios with a real sort of virtuoso bent to it. In this cadenza, I was thinking about that. Another innovation is the way he leads the orchestra back in. Everything sort of fades away with the cadenza, and then the orchestra comes in, hopefully imperceptibly. Wakes up and
now, a lot of violinists, when they first come out on the scene, come out with this piece, right? And I'm thinking Nadia Salerno-Sonnenberg, for example, her first recording was the Mendelssohn E minor concerto. Every budding violinist tries to play this piece or does perform it. So it sort of has a reputation of my first big concerto, and people sometimes regard it as maybe not the most technically challenging piece or intellectually challenging piece. Do you see it that way?
No. I mean, certainly technically, there's plenty of challenges in there. It's not for amateurs, shall we say. You got to work on it. I'm working hard on it, and it's that kind of transparent virtuosity that, it doesn't play itself. Intellectually and musically, that's an interesting question, because that gets into the kind of artistic interpretations we were talking about before. And it's always been an interesting question to me also, because Mendelssohn, like, still to this day can be sort of dismissed as kind of a lightweight by a lot of people. But I think when you listen to a piece like this, played really well, or something like the octet, Elijah, a few of his other really well-known works, you see what a really amazing composer, gifted composer, artist, cultural figure he was. I mean, it's got all the hallmarks of any great work of art. And the fact that he died, you know, at a very young age, and his output wasn't terribly huge, and also that he didn't really write any symphonies that stuck. There are a lot of reasons for why he has that lighter reputation. I have come to not buy it as much.
Well, I've looked at the score of this piece. It is really put together. Yeah. And just on the technical side, I think if you play a little bit of the finale, you'll see that this is, people will see that this is no walk in the park.
All right, well.
I'm Tom Strini for Third Coast Digest. I want to thank Frank Almond, and I want to thank the Florentine Opera for allowing us to use their production center to make this video today. And I'm looking forward to the Milwaukee Symphony opener on September the 14th, featuring Frank Almond.